She was left with nothing in divorce, but when she exposed his darkest secret, everyone gasped. The fluorescent lights above the courtroom flickered slightly, but Samantha's vision was already blurred. Her fingers were clenched tightly around the folded tissue in her lap, even though her tears had long dried up. Across the room, Gregory sat with perfect posture, his face unreadable, surrounded by sharp-suited lawyers who whispered and nodded, as if her entire life could be condensed into a few folders and clauses. The judge's voice droned on, echoing off the cold wooden panels, but Samantha only heard fragments: irreconcilable, no spousal support, non-contested assets. It was as though she was floating just outside her own body, watching the scene unfold like a poorly written play. 14 years of marriage unraveled in less than 45 minutes. When the gavel finally struck, Samantha didn't move. Gregory stood up, straightened his blazer, and gave a tight nod to his attorney before turning his back to her completely. There wasn't a single glance, no final word, not even a flicker of hesitation. She had come in with hope, however small, that maybe he'd change his mind at the last minute, that perhaps there was still a sliver of the man she'd married. But there wasn't. Her feet felt like anchors as she left the courthouse, every step echoing louder than the next. On the steps outside, the autumn wind bit into her exposed skin. She realized, all at once, that she didn't even have cab fare home. Samantha sat on the edge of her mattress, one of the only pieces of furniture in her new apartment, reading through the final divorce decree under the dim light of a flickering lamp. The ink felt like a scar on the page. She was to receive no alimony, no portion of their shared home, no claim to the retirement accounts she had once helped him build. "He is the sole earner," the paper stated. She did not contribute financially to the marriage in measurable terms. Measurable. As if the sacrifices, the dreams she deferred, the emotional labor poured into every detail of their shared life, those things didn't carry weight. The attorney Gregory hired had been ruthless. Samantha remembered the way the woman had looked at her in court, not with cruelty but with cold efficiency, like Samantha was simply another opponent to neutralize. It had worked. The judge, swayed by the arguments and documents presented, saw her as a liability rather than a partner who'd been left behind. The years Samantha spent caring for Gregory's sick mother, handling all housework so he could finish his dissertation, and building a peaceful home while he climbed the academic ladder, none of it mattered here. Now, all she had was this apartment with stained carpet and a broken radiator, and a job at a dusty little bookstore where her shifts barely paid enough for groceries. She folded the decree and set it on the floor. There was nowhere else to put it. It had been raining lightly on their wedding day, but neither of them had minded. Samantha remembered how Gregory had laughed when a drop of water landed on his tuxedo, brushing it off like a boy at recess, his brown eyes full of light. "Rain on your wedding day is good luck," the officiant had said. Samantha, flushed with joy and possibility, had believed it. Back then, he wasn't yet a tenured professor or a man with tailored suits and a self-satisfied smirk. He was simply Gregory, the awkward, brilliant man who once forgot their anniversary but left poems on her pillow every morning that week to make up for it. They had danced beneath a white tent that evening, to music chosen together, feet moving slowly, promises whispered like prayers. Now, that memory felt almost cruel. Gregory hadn't mentioned the wedding once during the divorce proceedings, nor had he acknowledged her contributions to his success. Samantha had read his official faculty biography a few days earlier, self-made scholar, published author, keynote speaker, and not a single mention of the woman who supported him while he worked 3 jobs and completed his PhD. The only thing left from that day was her wedding dress, still wrapped in protective plastic and tucked deep into the back of her closet. She tried to sell it, but the consignment shop told her it was too sentimental in design to resell. Too sentimental. Just like her. Samantha leaned back against the wall and closed her eyes, willing herself to forget the sound of their wedding song. A week after the ruling, Samantha received an invitation to a colleague's retirement party. She almost didn't go, but the isolation in her apartment had grown unbearable. She wore the nicest dress she had left and walked into the university banquet hall, greeted by warm lights and colder stares. Whispers followed her like shadows. "She got nothing, can you believe it?" one woman muttered near the buffet table. "Well, she never really worked, right?" came another voice, casually cruel. Samantha stood frozen for a moment before pretending not to hear, clutching her glass of wine like it might shield her from the humiliation. Then, Gregory appeared. He was with her, Caitlin, the grad student. Barely out of school and already dressed like the new wife of a man who'd built a life on borrowed loyalty. Caitlin looked her over with a smirk. "Oh, Samantha," she said with mock warmth. "Gregory said you were still in town." "That's sweet." Samantha simply nodded, not trusting her voice to stay level. Gregory said nothing. Just smiled his professional smile and turned away, arm around the young woman's waist. Samantha didn't cry that night. Not even when she got home and kicked off her heels, feet aching and heart hollow. But she remembered every word. And for the first time in weeks, she felt something stir inside her, something quiet and fierce. The ceiling above her bed leaked when it rained. Samantha had placed a pot beneath it, the rhythmic dripping becoming a kind of cruel lullaby. The paint on the walls was cracked and yellowing, and every window whistled when the wind picked up. She couldn't afford to fix any of it. Her furniture was a patchwork of donations from friends who pitied her enough to help but not enough to visit. She used milk crates for bookshelves and ate most of her meals sitting cross-legged on the floor. It was humbling. It was maddening. But in a strange way, it was also hers. She had started keeping a journal again, just like she did in college. At first, the entries were only lists of things to do: apply for library assistant job, buy secondhand coat, fix leaky faucet. But over time, her handwriting grew more assertive. Her thoughts deeper. She started writing about Gregory, not the man he had become, but the man he used to be. And then, she began to write about herself. The woman she had buried under years of compromise. The girl who once dreamed of being a teacher, a writer, someone who mattered. The apartment was a mess, but within those walls, something else was beginning. A slow, painful becoming. It was supposed to be a simple walk. Samantha had planned to pick up a used novel from the community bookstore and grab a small coffee before heading home. She liked this part of the city, it felt untouched by the sharp angles of Gregory's world. But as she stood in line at the cafe, she heard a familiar laugh, light and condescending, the kind of laugh that once echoed across dinner parties and lecture halls. Turning slowly, she saw Caitlin, dressed in a designer coat, hand wrapped possessively around Gregory's. They hadn't noticed her yet, too absorbed in their conversation. When Caitlin finally spotted her, her smile widened as though the universe had just gifted her the perfect audience. "Oh, Samantha. I didn't realize people still came here," she said, eyeing Samantha's worn jacket. Gregory didn't say a word. He just looked at Samantha with a detached curiosity, as if trying to remember where he'd seen her before. "He's finally with someone who understands his ambitions," Caitlin added casually, sipping her chai. The sting was sharp and precise. Samantha only nodded, hiding her trembling hands behind her cup. As she turned to leave, Gregory muttered, almost to himself, "You always hated this place." But he was wrong. She loved this place. What she hated was remembering what it meant when she was with him. That night, back in her apartment, Samantha sat on the edge of her mattress with the light off. The shadows across her walls felt like echoes of the past, stretching over her until she could barely breathe. Every insult, every moment of neglect, every decision to put his needs before her own came rushing back in a wave so strong she dropped the mug in her hands. It shattered against the floor, the noise loud in the silence, but she didn't move to clean it. She simply pressed her hands to her face and wept, not softly, but with the ugly, uncontrollable sobs that come when you realize your dignity has been chipped away piece by piece. She cried until her throat was raw, until her body gave up and curled in on itself like it was trying to disappear. In that moment, the walls of her apartment, the court papers, the memories, all of it became unbearable weight. She had loved a man who had dismantled her life with calculation. He had erased her contributions, repackaged her loyalty as dependence, and walked away without hesitation. She wanted to scream, to undo every choice that led her here. But all she could do was lie there, broken and small. Outside, the city moved on without her. But inside, a storm had started, one that would not go quietly. It had started with a search for an old charger. Samantha remembered stashing it in one of the boxes from the townhouse before Gregory took everything. Digging through cables and dusty notebooks, she pulled out a forgotten tablet, his, now technically hers by abandonment. Curious and unthinking, she powered it on. It was still connected to Gregory's old email. She shouldn't have opened it, but something told her to look. A name appeared in one of the subject lines, Marcus. A single unread message from 6 months before. She tapped it, hands cold. The email was short, but its weight was immediate. You told me we'd never speak of Marcus again. But if this story leaks, you'll lose more than tenure. I won't take the fall for what happened. The sender's name was unfamiliar, but Samantha's eyes went back to that one word, Marcus. She didn't know anyone by that name. Gregory had never mentioned a brother, a cousin, no one. Her heartbeat quickened as she read it again, this time slower. The tone wasn't just angry. It was scared. There was a secret here, buried deep in the past, one that Gregory had tried very hard to keep hidden. And now it was hers to uncover. She spent the next 2 days chasing fragments. Marcus. She searched their old photo albums, scanned Gregory's social media history, looked through his published works. Nothing. It was as if the name had never existed. But then, in a journal from their early years together, she found a single mention, Marcus called again. I told him not to use this number. The handwriting was Gregory's. There were no explanations, just that one line. It was like peering into a locked room through a keyhole, just enough to know something was inside, but not enough to see what it was. Samantha drove out to the town where Gregory grew up, a sleepy place with more silence than people. At the local records office, she asked about family files. After a long wait and an annoyed clerk, she was handed a thin folder. There it was. Marcus. Same last name. Date of birth, 7 years younger than Gregory. Date of death, 1994. But the strangest part? An academic journal article published in 1996 under both their names. A piece Gregory had proudly claimed as his own during his tenure review. Samantha stared at the date in disbelief. Either the records were wrong, or Marcus wasn't as gone as everyone believed. Her fingers trembled. Gregory's secret was larger than she imagined. Back at her apartment, Samantha printed the journal article and pinned it next to the death certificate she had requested from the local office. Side by side, they screamed contradiction. The dates didn't match, the story didn't make sense, and for the first time in weeks, Samantha felt something other than pain. She felt purpose. She rehearsed what she would say, how she would confront him, but it wasn't anger that fueled her, it was clarity. The man who stood in court and said she was irrelevant had spent years hiding behind lies even darker than she suspected. The next day, she waited for him in the parking lot behind the university's humanities building. He looked surprised when he saw her, and for a brief second, there was almost a flicker of guilt in his eyes. "What are you doing here?" he asked, guarded. She stepped forward, holding the papers. "Marcus," she said simply. Gregory's face paled. "You don't know anything," he snapped. But Samantha didn't flinch. "No," she said, voice calm. "But I will." As he turned and walked away, she saw it, his hands clenched, his stride uneven. For the first time, Gregory looked afraid. And Samantha? She felt stronger than she had in years. Samantha returned to the library with a folder under her arm and fire in her chest. She hadn't walked into a university building in months, not since she'd been dismissed as an afterthought in Gregory's world, but now she moved with purpose. The archives room was empty except for a student assistant who barely looked up when she entered. She requested newspaper clippings, local yearbooks, and faculty newsletters from Gregory's hometown. At first, there was little, just a mention of a local science fair, a blurred photo of two boys, one of whom resembled Gregory. But then, tucked into an old magazine from 1995, was a memorial, in loving memory of Marcus S. Barlow. The brief obituary described a tragic fall at home and no foul play suspected. But something didn't sit right. Samantha studied the wording, then the lack of follow-up. There was no mention of autopsy results, no funeral photos, no extended family comments. It was as if the town had collectively turned the page on a story that had never been told properly. She snapped a photo of the article and added it to her growing collection. There was a silence surrounding Marcus's death that didn't feel like grief, it felt like fear. And she was beginning to suspect that fear had protected Gregory all these years. Driven by unease, Samantha tracked down Gregory's childhood address. The house still stood, though it looked tired now, paint peeling, porch sagging, the remnants of a forgotten past. A woman answered the door, gray-haired and guarded, and Samantha introduced herself carefully. "I was married to Gregory Barlow," she said. The woman's eyes darkened. "I don't want trouble," she whispered. But Samantha wasn't there to cause trouble. She just wanted truth. After some silence, the woman finally spoke. "There was something wrong about that night," she said slowly. But everyone was told not to ask questions. Gregory left the next day. That house had seen something. The woman, who'd been their neighbor, described a cold winter evening, sirens, Gregory's mother crying in the street. "They said Marcus slipped down the stairs," she continued, voice distant. But no one believed it. He was too careful. Samantha asked if there had ever been an investigation. "No," she said. His father shut everything down. Said it would only bring more pain. Samantha thanked her and left, but her hands shook as she drove away. Gregory hadn't just buried Marcus. He'd built his career on the silence that followed. And now, that silence was cracking. Samantha followed another lead that brought her to a now-closed boys' home where Marcus had lived briefly as a teen. The building was being turned into a museum, but a volunteer caretaker let her walk the halls. On the third floor, faded names were still etched into the wood near the dormitory doors. Marcus B. was one of them. A box of old intake documents in the office revealed that Marcus had been temporarily placed there after Gregory's parents separated for a time. One report noted he was quiet but academically gifted, and there was a photo, Marcus, smiling faintly, standing alone in front of a bookshelf. As she turned to leave, an older man approached. "You looking into Marcus?" he asked. His name was Walter, a retired nurse who had volunteered there for years. "He was a sweet boy," he said. "Looked up to Gregory. Talked about him all the time." Samantha asked what happened. Walter hesitated. "I think something broke between them," he said at last. "Marcus left early. Went back to live with their dad. Next thing we heard, he was dead." The pieces were forming a picture, and it was darker than Samantha had imagined. Marcus hadn't just vanished. He'd been erased. Back home, Samantha spread every photo, document, and note across her floor like a detective unraveling a cold case. She created a timeline, birth certificates, school enrollments, Marcus's brief stay at the orphanage, Gregory's sudden enrollment in a graduate program just 1 month after Marcus's death. There was overlap where there shouldn't have been, publications with Marcus's name that Gregory later republished under his own. It was theft, not just of credit, but of a life. Gregory had taken what remained of his brother's voice and made it the foundation of his career. She pinned everything to a corkboard she found discarded in an alley, the kind teachers once used in classrooms. Thread ran between events, names, years. The deeper she went, the clearer it became, Gregory's reputation was a tapestry woven from someone else's thread. It was a betrayal far worse than infidelity. He hadn't just lied to her. He had manipulated an entire narrative, turned personal tragedy into professional advantage, and buried the one person who might have told the truth. But now, Samantha had the story. All she needed was the right moment to make it matter. After days of cold calls and online searches, Samantha reached out to every name Marcus had once been associated with: teachers, neighbors, even a librarian from the orphanage's volunteer board. Most declined to speak. Some didn't remember. But then, a woman named Mrs. Hargrave responded. "I was a nurse at the clinic that treated Marcus," she said. "You'd better come in person." Samantha made the drive the next morning. Mrs. Hargrave was in her 80s now, but her memory was sharp. "He came in with bruises," she said. "Said he fell." But his eyes, they told a different story. She opened an old folder, kept all these years, out of guilt or instinct, Samantha didn't know. Inside was a medical form and an intake note written in Marcus's own hand. "My brother says I need to stop talking about what happened." That line was underlined in red by the attending physician. But no one followed up. The case was closed when the boy died. "I wanted to say something back then," Mrs. Hargrave whispered, "but I was afraid of what might happen to me. His father was a donor. And Gregory, he already had people wrapped around his finger." Samantha took a copy of the form. It wasn't just theory anymore. She had proof. It was an impulsive decision, driven more by instinct than plan, when Samantha drove to Gregory's old family house. The property had been sold years ago, but the current owner, an elderly man renovating the space, agreed to let her look around. The house was nearly stripped to its frame, drywall removed, pipes exposed, but the basement remained intact. In the far corner, hidden behind a leaning cabinet, Samantha noticed a built-in compartment sealed with rusted metal. It looked like a storage box, long untouched. With shaking hands, she reached behind a support beam and found something taped to the wood, a small silver key. She didn't think twice. It fit the lock perfectly. Inside the safe, among moldy papers and brittle receipts, was a leather journal, its edges worn and stained. It was Marcus's. Pages were filled with erratic handwriting, entries ranging from daily routines to phrases like "he's watching me" and "he took my work again." There were sketches, formulas, diagrams. Some pages were torn out. But the fear was evident. The last entry read, "I told him I'd go to the school board. He said if I did, no one would believe me. Then he said I'd regret it." Samantha closed the book, heart racing. This wasn't just proof of plagiarism. It was the prelude to something much worse. Back in her apartment, Samantha spent the entire night reading Marcus's journal. It was a descent into chaos, brilliance crumbling under the weight of betrayal. Marcus had been brilliant, ahead of his time, developing theories Gregory would later publish as his own. The more Samantha read, the more she realized how systematic the theft had been. Marcus described being locked out of the computer lab, his notes disappearing, professors suddenly avoiding him. The journal wasn't written in anger, it was a desperate attempt to stay sane in a world that kept erasing him. Toward the end, the tone shifted. Marcus became paranoid, fearful of being followed. He referenced conversations with Gregory that grew more threatening. He said I'm unstable, that no one would listen if I told them. But I'm not the one who changed the data. The academic theft was one thing. But there were hints, dark ones, that Marcus feared for his life. Samantha circled these lines, knowing that even if she couldn't prove criminal action, the moral rot was undeniable. Gregory hadn't just taken Marcus's research, he'd taken his voice, his safety, and eventually, his future. Samantha knew then that silence was no longer an option. Days passed, but Samantha couldn't shake the image of Marcus writing in that journal, hunched in a cold basement while Gregory thrived above him. She could hear Gregory's voice in her head, calm and condescending, telling her she didn't contribute, that she was lucky to have shared his name. Those words, once so devastating, now rang hollow. He had built his entire life on other people's backs, hers, Marcus's, and probably many more. The realization didn't break her. It solidified her. She took everything, the journal, the medical form, the emails, the death record, and laid them out on her living room floor. She scanned, copied, and backed up every file. She wasn't going to throw these findings into the void. They needed to be seen. A name came to mind, Dr. Voss, the ethics chair at Gregory's University. Samantha had never met her but remembered her as a woman with a spine. She drafted a package, carefully labeling every piece. On top, she wrote, "For review, ethics and conduct violation, Gregory Barlow." Then she sealed the envelope. The moment she dropped it in the mailbox, she didn't feel fear. She felt ready. It took less than a week. Samantha didn't expect a response, but on a Thursday morning, her phone rang from an unknown number. "This is Dr. Voss. I need to speak with you." The conversation was short but direct. Dr. Voss confirmed she had received the documents and was initiating a formal review. "You've brought something serious to light. And I promise you, it won't be ignored." Samantha thanked her quietly and hung up. For the first time in months, she allowed herself a deep breath. It had begun. By Monday, whispers filled the university's halls. Gregory's students noticed his absence. Faculty inboxes filled with meeting invites marked confidential. An internal email leaked, referencing a pending investigation into academic misconduct. Samantha watched it unfold from a distance, neither gloating nor shrinking. Gregory had spent years walking untouchable through those corridors. Now, those same halls were turning against him. Truth, long buried, was clawing its way into the light. And Samantha, once dismissed as nothing more than a failed wife, had become the storm that no one expected. Inside the university, the walls were closing in. Gregory had always relied on charm, reputation, and carefully curated relationships. But none of those could save him now. His office door remained shut. Rumors spread faster than facts about stolen research, a dead brother, ethics violations. Students gossiped in the library. Faculty whispered in elevators. He tried to deny it at first. Called it a smear campaign from a bitter ex-wife. But the documents told another story, one no polished speech could undo. The panel convened quietly, but the questions were sharp. Why had he failed to disclose Marcus's co-authorship? Why were dates on publications inconsistent with death records? And why, in every one of Gregory's celebrated theories, did Marcus's name vanish without explanation? Gregory stumbled through his defense, but the damage was done. His legacy was unraveling. He'd thought he could outsmart the truth. But the truth had a face now. Samantha's. And she wasn't hiding anymore. It was a clear Wednesday afternoon when Samantha walked into the back of the lecture hall. Gregory was at the podium, mid-presentation, addressing a full room of students and staff about ethics in academic innovation. The irony wasn't lost on her. She sat in the last row, quiet, unnoticed at first. The room buzzed with admiration for the man they still believed to be a pioneer. But Samantha's silence was temporary. When he opened the floor for questions, she stood. "I have one," she said. Her voice didn't waver. Gregory blinked, startled. She stepped into the aisle, holding up a photo. "Is it ethical to publish your brother's work posthumously, without crediting him?" Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Gregory faltered, his polished speech collapsing under the weight of a single sentence. Samantha didn't wait for his answer. She walked to the front, placed Marcus's journal on the podium, and said, "If you're going to speak of ethics, speak of this." Gasps followed. A few students began recording. Gregory's face flushed deep red. He reached for the journal but stopped when Samantha stepped between him and the pages. "I'm not here for revenge," she said calmly. "I'm here for the truth." And with that, she walked out, leaving the room in stunned silence and Gregory exposed under the lights he once craved. The video spread within hours. Students shared it on campus forums, tagging the university's official accounts. Faculty watched it during lunch breaks. Comments poured in, some in defense, many in disbelief. The footage showed Gregory's hesitation, the accusation, the journal, the way his hands trembled when faced with what he could no longer control. Samantha's face, calm and unshaken, became a symbol of something bigger than one scandal. She had disrupted a system that had protected him for years. She had done it not as a scholar, but as someone he once dismissed. The university's administration, unable to contain the storm, held an emergency press conference. Samantha didn't attend, but she watched it online. "We are deeply disturbed by the allegations," the dean said. Effective immediately, Dr. Barlow is placed on indefinite suspension pending further review. That night, Samantha sat on her couch, legs curled beneath her, staring at the screen. Gregory's fall wasn't just professional, it was public, irreversible. The truth was out. But justice, she knew, was something still in progress. For now, there was silence. And in that silence, she felt something close to peace. The following morning, campus was eerily quiet. Posters featuring Gregory's name had been taken down. Lecture announcements were cancelled. The department issued a formal statement disavowing any prior knowledge of misconduct. Samantha, though not a student or employee, was contacted by several faculty members thanking her, some anonymously. One professor wrote, "I suspected something years ago but lacked the courage to act. You gave the rest of us a mirror." It was surreal. For the first time in years, her name carried power, not borrowed from Gregory, but born from her own truth. Meanwhile, Gregory retreated from public view. He canceled appearances, declined interviews, and disconnected his office line. The house he shared with Caitlin was suddenly quiet. Neighbors reported boxes being moved. Caitlin was seen leaving alone. No one knew if she left him or was simply avoiding the fallout. Either way, Gregory's world, the one he built so carefully, was collapsing. And the collapse wasn't loud. It was slow, quiet, heavy with consequence. Samantha didn't celebrate. She mourned the years she had wasted, but she didn't wish them back. What she wanted now was to move forward, freely. Days later, Samantha received an envelope with no return address. Inside was a legal notice, Gregory's mother requesting a cease and desist regarding public statements about the family. The irony made Samantha laugh bitterly. For decades, they buried Marcus under falsehoods, and now they wanted silence. But Samantha had no intention of backing down. She forwarded the letter to Dr. Voss, who replied simply, "Let them try." The law, at last, was on Samantha's side. Truth, when documented, didn't need permission to breathe. What followed was a strange calm. Gregory's family retreated. Their attorneys went quiet. Samantha suspected they were negotiating behind closed doors, trying to salvage what they could. But she wasn't afraid. She had faced her worst fear, being invisible, discarded, and survived. One night, while reviewing copies of her collected documents, she whispered aloud, "You were right, Marcus. He was afraid they'd believe you." And now, they finally had. Samantha met Gregory one final time. It wasn't planned. She saw him outside a grocery store, hunched, thinner, unshaven. He saw her too and approached slowly, as if unsure how to behave. "I didn't mean for it to go this far," he said. His voice lacked its usual confidence. He looked at her the way a man looks at a locked door he once had the key to. "You always had choices," she replied. "And you always chose yourself." He opened his mouth to respond, but no words came. Just silence. He reached into his coat, pulling out a small folded paper. "It's a letter," he said. "For you. About everything." Samantha didn't take it. "There's nothing in that paper I don't already know," she said. "I didn't need your apology to find the truth. And I don't need it now to move on." Gregory looked at the ground, then at her one last time. "You've changed," he said. She nodded. "No," she corrected. "You just never saw me." And with that, she turned and walked away, this time, for good. Samantha hadn't planned to go public beyond the university. But one morning, she opened her inbox and found a message from a small independent publisher. The editor had seen the viral lecture hall video and was moved not only by the exposure of Gregory's lies but by Samantha's quiet strength. "We're looking for real stories," the message said. "Would you consider writing yours?" She hesitated at first. Her life wasn't a book, it was pain, years of silence, and buried rage. But the more she thought about it, the more she realized others needed to know what happens when a woman is told she's nothing, and finds out she's everything. She started writing at night. Each chapter came slowly, memories stitched with facts, heartbreak softened by resilience. She didn't write to destroy Gregory, he had already done that to himself. She wrote to give voice to Marcus. To the woman she once was. To anyone who had been erased by someone else's ego. The process was exhausting but healing. With every page, she reclaimed pieces of herself she didn't know were still there. When she finished the manuscript, she emailed it with trembling hands. The response came back within days, "It's powerful. We'd be honored to publish this." The book wasn't even out yet when a nonprofit invited Samantha to speak at their annual seminar on women's financial and emotional independence post-divorce. She almost said no. Public speaking had never been her strength, and she still felt like she was learning to stand on new legs. But something inside her said yes. On the day of the event, she wore a navy blue blazer, borrowed, and stood before a crowd of women of all ages, many nodding before she even spoke. They knew. They understood. That alone made her less afraid. She didn't talk about Gregory right away. She talked about silence. About how a woman can disappear in a relationship, how she can become so small she forgets the sound of her own voice. Then she talked about the moment she found it again, how she didn't roar, she didn't fight, she simply stood and spoke truth. The applause was soft at first, then stronger. Afterward, several women came to her in tears. "You told my story," one said. Samantha didn't cry then. She smiled gently and held the woman's hand. Because sometimes, surviving is the loudest thing you can do. Weeks after her talk, Samantha received a message through her publisher's website. It was from a woman named Eliza. The subject line read, "You saved me." In the email, Eliza explained she had been engaged to Gregory shortly after Samantha. "I found your story just in time," it read. "He told me his brother died tragically, but your book made me see what he never said." Eliza hadn't known about the academic fraud, nor the full scope of Gregory's past. But when she confronted him, he didn't deny it. "He said it was all behind him," she wrote. "I told him that's exactly the problem." Samantha sat with the message for a long time. She had never set out to warn others, only to free herself. But knowing that her words had protected someone else from the same fate felt like a gift. She replied simply, "I'm glad you saw him for who he is. And I hope you now see yourself for who you are, too." That night, she looked at the final draft of her book again. Not with doubt, but with gratitude. The truth had traveled further than she ever imagined. The apartment was brighter now. The radiator still clanged in the winter, and the windows still creaked, but Samantha no longer felt trapped there. She had found a rhythm. Mornings at the bookstore, afternoons writing, evenings sometimes just sitting by the window with a cup of tea. A new plant sat on the sill, a birthday gift from a colleague. She hadn't known much about keeping plants alive, but this one thrived under her care. It bloomed slowly, confidently, much like her own recovery. On weekends, she volunteered at a community center helping women navigate legal and financial options after separation. They didn't always know who she was, but some recognized her name. "Is it true?" they'd ask. She would nod, but then say, "What matters is that it's possible." Healing. Rebuilding. Becoming. She no longer defined herself by Gregory, or even by what she had overcome. She was simply Samantha again. And that was enough. The book was released quietly, without fanfare, but within weeks, it began gaining attention. Book clubs picked it up. Articles were written. Emails poured in from people who saw their own reflection in her words. Then came the first book signing. A small event in a local shop, nothing glamorous, but intimate. Samantha sat behind a table with a pen in hand, her name printed in soft gold on the book covers. A young woman approached with tears in her eyes. "Thank you," she whispered. "You reminded me I'm not invisible." Samantha smiled and opened the book to the title page. She paused, then wrote the dedication with slow, deliberate strokes, to Marcus. "You were never forgotten. And to every woman told she was too small to matter, may you remember your voice is louder than silence." When the woman took the book and walked away, Samantha sat back for a moment, soaking it in. She had been erased. She had been humiliated. But in the end, she hadn't just survived. She had transformed. And this time, the ending was hers to write.